having the fist is clenched, sign of power, right? So, but for women, you can see that their palm is extended, sign of mercy.
Now, I'd like to ask about the ears. I've noticed that actually the statues of the Middle Kingdom have big ears. Is that
Yes.
really true or so?
This is true because art during the Middle Kingdom was different. So the art during the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom was more delicate. But here in the Middle Kingdom, even before, we have noticed that the feet of Mentuhotep Nebetra is huge in proportion of the rest of the body. But also you can see that the ears are big. Also you can see sometimes that the lips are big, the nose are big, but unfortunately here the nose is destroyed.
Dr. Mohammed, flanking us now and behind us we have two columns, and they date to the Second Intermediate Period, but they are exhibited here. Now, would you talk to us about the styles and types of columns we had in ancient Egypt?
Yes, during the time of the ancient Egyptian civilization, mainly there were 2 or 3 types of columns. And these columns are representing the flowers. There were 2 main flowers in ancient Egypt. We had the papyrus and we had the lotus. The papyrus was the symbol of the north, the delta, and even it looks like the delta. And the lotus resembles, or it was planted in Upper Egypt, in the south. So that's why the ancient Egyptians represented the capitals of their columns as if they are the flowers. That's why once you go inside the temples, when you see the columns inside, they are not the columns, but they are the flowers of this temple, but those flowers were made of stones, right? So for example, here you can see the papyrus flowers representing the closed papyrus flowers, because we have the closed papyrus and the open papyrus as well, and you can see that it resembles and it shows the northern part of Egypt.
Now, were there also some capitals with palm fronds, or not always?
Yes, of course, and we have the composed capitals, because sometimes they put the papyrus and the lotus together. Sometimes even they use the head of goddess Hathor to represent the capital. So we have different types of columns in the ancient Egyptian civilization. It depends on the period itself, because when you go to visit the temples of the Greeks and the Romans, the Greco-Roman temples in Upper Egypt, like Komombo, Phila, Edfu, and those temples, you will see that the columns are different. So when you go to see the columns in the temple of Saqqara, or the complex of Saqqara, so you will see that the columns are different. Even the columns are not freestanding like this, the columns are attached to the walls. So it depends on the architect who decides how to make these statues.
Dr. Mohammed, so actually the coffin text is a development of what is known as the pyramid text, and it has many phases in its or stages in development. So would you talk to us about such a mortuary formula?
Yes, the ancient Egyptians, as we said before, believed in resurrection, and they believed that they will live again in the afterlife. So they had so many books, for example, something that they do believe in. So they had the pyramid texts the coffin texts and the Book of the Dead. For example, the Book of the Dead has 12 hours. We call them the 12 hours of night. So the deceased has to go through these hours to reach the sunrise. So that's why here we have the magical spells, and the deceased has to read these magical spells in order to go to the afterlife. So, for example, here we have the sarcophagus of one of the priests of the Middle Kingdom, and you can see that it is painted from inside, and you can see the offering formula, and we call it the Hatib Din Su formula or the offering formula. And then on the second register, you can see that everything that he might need in the afterlife. You can see the neck rest, you can see mirrors, you can see necklaces, you can see earrings, and how impressive to see that earrings were used by men at the time. You can see jars, food and drinks. You can see the bows and arrows, and maybe he was the overseer of the army, and you can see the sandals. From the design here, you can see that they placed the head of the deceased in this direction and the feet were there, because here we can see the neck rest and there we can see the sandals. Then down there you can see the text is written there. This is to protect the mummy of the deceased. Then you have the sarcophagus to protect the mummy of the deceased. And then right here we can see the two eyes of Horus to allow the deceased to see what's happening outside his place. This is to help the spirit, or this is to help the Ka to identify the facial features of the deceased.
Also, I've noticed that actually there are two scripts here. There is one in full character and one almost like a type of cursive form.
Yes.
What are these scripts?
So, in the ancient Egyptian civilization, we had different types of writings or scripts. The hieroglyphs, hieratic, and demotic. The hieroglyphs is the sacred language, and it was the language or the script of the priests. It was very official. Then the hieratic for the priests, and demotic, demos, it's for the commoners and for the people at that time.
So here we have the full script would be the
This is
colorful, the hieroglyph.
The colorful one is the hieroglyphic, and also from the beautiful signs here, we can tell the direction of reading. Because if you notice here, you can see that all the figures are looking to the right side. So in this case, we start reading from the right. The ancient Egyptians were very smart. They had their writings from either left to right or right to left, and sometimes from the top to the bottom. And from the features and from the figures, we can tell which direction is the script.
Then the second one, which is more cursive, that would be the hieratic?
The hieratic, because it is more religious. And
Now,
of course, it's written in columns, and it has different spells. For example, when I say spell number 151B, it talks about the funerary masks, how to protect the deceased and how to protect the facial features, and it has so many spells.
Muhammad, was it common for the ancient Egyptians to make statues out of wood?
Yes, the ancient Egyptians actually were very skillful to carve statues made of different materials. So we have seen statues made out of stones for the kings, because the stone is more expensive, because they had to do expeditions and campaigns to the desert to bring the blocks and to carve the statues, right? And we have other statues are made out of wood, like this one, for instance, and they were made out of either sycamore wood, and it was a sacred wood. It is the symbol of goddess Hathor, and also the cedar wood, which was brought from Lebanon. But though it is made out of wood, or it was made out of wood, it shows how skillful wear the ancient Egyptians to represent their art. If you look at the curly wigs, if you look at the eyes, you can see the facial features, you can see the muscles, you can see the arms, you can see the kilt. And though this statue is destroyed, but it shows the passion of the ancient Egyptians while they were carving their statues. Because let's agree on something, that everyone in the ancient Egyptian civilization had the right to have this statue or this representation, because he wanted to help his ka, or he wanted to help his spirit to come to recognize his facial features. So this was very important for every person to have a statue. So if he cannot make a statue made out of stone, he can make a statue made out of wood and other materials. For example, we have the statue of Pipi is made out of copper, right? So we have different materials which shows the skills of the ancient Egyptians in carving their statues.
Actually, the statue here, the facial features is different. It seems more Nubian. Is that true?
The ancient Egyptians, of course, had mercenaries coming from Nubia, and they served in the Egyptian army, so that's why you can see the facial features. And this is, again, shows the skillful art of the ancient Egyptians, how they represented their kings, how they represented their queens, how they represented the Egyptian workers, how they represented the African and the Nubian military mercenaries. So it shows the power of art during the Middle Kingdom, though, as we said before, that the characteristics of the Middle Kingdom is different than the Old Kingdom. Back to the statues, for example, you remember that in the Old Kingdom period, we have the statues of the workers. Why the ancient Egyptians made small statues for the workers? Because they wanted those workers to perform the daily activities for them in the afterlife. So that's why they had these small statues. And if you look at the facial features of those workers, you can see that they are different, because they were made for certain people at the time. Not just a copy for the workers, but they were showing us different people. For example, back to the statues, the ancient Egyptians were very skillful to represent a small statue for King Cheops, and it was made out of ivory. So again, this shows the power and the skills of the ancient Egyptians to carve statues made out of ivory for 7.5 centimeters.
Today we have you together, part of the gallery of the Middle Kingdom at the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities. We learned how the Middle Kingdom started, who unified Egypt after a long period of decline. We also looked into the art and religious beliefs of that period. And by this we come to an end of this episode of Treasures. Until then, in another place and another treasure, it's goodbye.